What's up guys, my name is Ace, and the Black Ops 6 beta is finally here, and in today's video, I'm going to be sharing my early initial impressions of this game, based on quite a bit of hands-on time several months back at the Treyarch studio, as well as my early initial impressions of the beta, and keep in mind, quite a few things have changed actually since the build that I played a while back. Now of course, this is just an initial impressions video, my opinions will likely evolve over time, I'm sure I'm going to discover a bunch of things throughout the duration of the beta, and of course, I will be having like a final beta review or a final beta feedback video, probably one for week 1 and one for week 2 as well. And another thing in this video is I'm primarily just going to be sticking to things that are actually in the beta build of the game. I'm not going to be talking about things like prestige and progression and stuff that we won't really have access to until the full build of the game. Although I will say, I am very excited for traditional prestige. And let's just dive right into my initial impressions here and talk about the good things. The things that I'm liking what I'm seeing and experiencing so far with the beta. And let's just start it off with the big new thing, Omni movement. I realize this is likely going to end up being a fairly polarizing thing with the community, but I'm on the side of enjoying Omni movement. At least overall, I will be mentioning it briefly in the cons section as well. I quite like the depth and options that this adds within the gameplay itself. And honestly, at least early on here, I really don't feel like Omni movement is necessary to succeed in the game. You don't have to be sliding sideways or diving sideways or sprinting backwards or anything in order to dominate a lobby. As long as you have solid FPS fundamentals, you could literally never use any of the Omni movement systems and you'd be just fine without it. In saying that though, I like that the option is there. It does add a nice layer to the gameplay. If you want to get a little bit flashy and do some crazy move, you have that ability in the game. But you also have to balance the pros and cons with Omni movements, and there absolutely are cons attached to diving around a corner and trying to challenge an enemy player. So far at least, my experience with Omni movement has been quite positive, but like I said, I do still have some concerns when it comes to Omni movement, and we'll talk about that in a bit. As for the next thing in the good section here, this is just the weapon feel and the gunfights. I feel like there's not a ton of visual recoil. The time to kill, for me at least, feels solid. It is slightly faster than Cold War on average, but it's pretty similar to Cold War. Also, especially with Omni movement being in the game, I like the time to kill consistency that we're seeing as well. Regular guns like assault rifles, SMGs, LMGs, they don't have separate body multipliers. And that means a 4-shot kill gun in a particular damage range is always going to be a 4-shot kill to the body, rather than sometimes a 4-shot, sometimes a 5-shot, depending on where you hit them. And to me, I think that's great and makes sense when you're dealing with people that are diving around all over the place. As for the weapons, well, we only have a very limited selection of the weapons, especially in the first weekend right now. So far, they do seem to have a good amount of character to them, and that's something I like about Treyarch games. We tend to see more character with each of the individual weapons compared to some of the more recent Call of Duty games we've seen. And I am also basing that partially on my early playtime with the game, where I did have access to many more of the weapons. As for another gameplay element that I'm liking so far, this is the auto lean feature. I really like how they've implemented it to the game, where it just automatically happens as you approach a corner while aimed down sight. It is based on your movement speed as you approach that corner as well. And the big key here is it doesn't seem to affect your point of aim or your aiming or recoil control at all. It's just a subtle lean in first person. And to me, at least so far, it just feels natural. It feels like something that should have been there all along. And while it is fairly subtle, I am actually liking this feature quite a bit. Next up in the good section, well, we only have access to a limited number of them. I'm going to put maps here. So far, I'm liking the variety and layouts that we have access to. Yes, most, if not all of the 6v6 maps at least, are a 3-lane design, but that just refers to the general structure, and there's actually quite a bit of variety in how the maps are laid out, given that 3-lane restriction. And that's not even mentioning the general vibe and theme to each of these maps is quite unique. It doesn't feel like you're just playing the same map with the same color palette. Every one of them has its own unique character, and I like that. Now on a similar note, but going beyond just the map design, I personally like the general art style of the game. Now I realize it's not for everyone, but in Call of Duty, I personally don't like it when they go too far in the realism department, especially when it comes to lighting elements, and Infinity Ward tends to do that, whereas Treyarch tends to lean a bit more toward the arcadey style that I feel is geared much more toward supporting the gameplay itself. Character models tend to pop a lot. You're not going to run into too many issues with people hiding in a dark corner and not being able to see their character model in this game, because they do pop, and it is a bit more of that arcadey feel to it. And like I said, for Call of Duty at least, I like that. Next, so far, well, it's still early on and we don't have access to the entire created class system, I am liking the general created class structure this time around. Especially with the simplified attachments in the gunsmith, where almost all of them are purely pros. Some of them do have cons attached to them, even if they're not stating they have cons right now. I suspect some of that will be adjusted. At the moment, it looks like we don't have access to the advanced stats, but we know they're coming in the game, so I'm looking forward to seeing those as well. And I guess I should say, on this note of me liking the general class structure, that doesn't mean I'm not going to have some feedback, most likely, when it comes to certain specific elements on that. So maybe like some perk balancing, for instance. Next, something I was happy to see now that I've actually been able to play the game on my own setup with my own headset and everything, is the default footstep audio seems to be in a good place. You can definitely hear footsteps in a quiet environment when somebody is sprinting up to you, but I've noticed it's not overwhelming. It's not like louder than the gunfire that's going on around you like we see in some other recent Call of Duty games. And as a result, at least as of right now, based on my initial impressions, I don't think the Ninja perk is going to be like an absolute necessity in respawn game modes, at least. Now, search and destroy, of course, that's a different story. It always is when it comes to that. But I think that's excellent, having the option to use Ninja if we want, but not really feeling the need to use it all the time. And then moving on from there, I just wanted to blast through a few miscellaneous things that I'm liking what I'm seeing so far. First off, I know it's early to be making statements like this, but it seems like their best play system is the best tuned best play system we've seen in Call of Duty so far. What I mean by this is typically the best play that you see at the end of the game was genuinely a really solid play, and not just something boring like a sniper double kill, for instance. That's something where we have had best plays or play of the game in the past, and it's often just not tuned super well, to the point where many people were just wanting the final kill cam to come back in its place. But in this game, at least based on the handful of games that I played so far, the best play has actually been quite solid. Additionally, for random miscellaneous things, the UI improvements are very welcome. It's definitely familiar to Modern Warfare 2 and Modern Warfare 3, but there's absolutely a lot of navigation improvements, and it's already so much more intuitive to navigate many of the menus, at least, like the Create a Class menus, for instance. I'm really liking that. I'm liking the vertical scrolling much more than that horizontal scrolling. Also, I love the fact that we have that HUD customization. Personally, I like, and I'm very used to, the general layout that Call of Duty uses, so I didn't really make any massive changes here. I just made sure I changed over to a square minimap. I think that is quite important, and I'd recommend you do that. But in general, I just really like the options that we have there. Additionally, a little detail I noticed is the after-action report is extremely detailed after the match. You can see all the little stats that you might want to see there, all the medals you earned, and everything that goes along with that. I'm really liking that after-action report. It feels super polished. I think that's like the main general thing I want to wrap the good section up with here. I'm sure I missed a bunch of little things I could have picked out and said these are great as well and I enjoy them, but overall the impression I'm getting here is polish. It doesn't seem like this was rushed together like we've seen with some recent Call of Duty games. It seems like this is a game they've been working on for quite some time. They've got lots of little features built in there and they're fully fleshed out. The gameplay itself seems to have really good bones to it. It's overall feeling quite solid. Of course, I do already have some feedback regarding the gameplay, and I definitely hope that they make some adjustments and improvements over time, especially with the beta build of the game. But the core of the game that I'm seeing so far is feeling really good. And saying that though, it's time to move into the second part of this video, and that is the things I didn't like, or maybe just some things that I have some concerns about, because it's still early days, and I'm not 100% sure if these things will actually end up being horrible long-term, or if it's just sort of everybody's jumping into the game for the first time, we don't know what's going on with it, and it's stuff that we just have to learn over time. And just to point out here, this section may end up being longer than the good section, and that's simply due to the fact that it tends to take longer to explain the bad things rather than just listing out the things that are good. Overall, I'm feeling quite positive about this, but let's get into some of the issues that I've got so far. And the first part here, we're once again going to be talking about Omni movement. Like I said, in general, I like the Omni movement and the layer and depth that adds to the gameplay. However, especially initially, it can be very visually jarring if you're implementing a lot of Omni movement into your gameplay. Obviously, that's stuff that just takes some time to get used to, and I think once we do get some time to get a better feel for things, then it's going to feel a lot better. I'm probably going to look back on this gameplay down the road and be like, oh my god, what bot movement you have with that Omni movement. There's definitely a learning curve to it. Another thing with the Omni movement is the new supine prone system is a little awkward. I find that it can sometimes be hard to see enemies that are prone, and I think it's just an animation thing. Like, I'm used to seeing a prone enemy look a certain way in Call of Duty, and my brain just immediately registers them as a dead player if they're laying on their back, for instance, because you normally can't do that in Call of Duty. So again, I think this is an area where that complaint will probably just fade away over time once I get used to it. But as of right now, I've definitely been taken off guard a good handful of times by people that were just laying down. Now, another thing with Omni movements that I just want to list out as a concern rather than something I think is objectively bad at the moment, this is various exploits that I feel are going to be discovered when it comes to Omni movement. I actually saw a couple clips from the COD Next event where in third-person mode, there was some ridiculously jarring Omni movement that was basically impossible to track. And right now, my initial experience with the beta wasn't that bad. I wasn't experiencing anything too wild like this, but as people start to have the time to master the Omni movement, I suspect we are going to be running into what I would consider to be movement exploits that are attached to the Omni movement system, and I'm just hoping Treyarch manages to stay on top of those things so that there are proper pros and cons to every movement that you make, and also to make it so it doesn't look like enemies are literally teleporting around your screen. So there we go. Those are a few concerns that I have with the Omni movement system at this point. Next, something I noticed right away, tactical sprint feels pretty slow in this game. Now, maybe I'm just missing out on some perks or attachments or something like that, but my initial thoughts as I was tac sprinting is, am I actually tac sprinting or is this just a regular sprint? It didn't really feel like you could move nearly as quickly as something like Modern Warfare 3, for instance, when in a tac sprint. And while I will say I think the movement has got a little out of hand as far as movement speed goes in something like Modern Warfare 3, I think the difference between regular sprint and tactical sprints isn't super noticeable at the moment in this game. And that just keeps bringing me back to the same thought. Do we really need tactical sprint in the game? Why can't we just go back to one sprint level, make it the exact same speed as our current tactical sprint level, since that kind of already feels like a regular sprint to me, and then just call it a day? No tactical sprint out times to be worrying about or anything. You just have one sprint out time because you're either sprinting or not sprinting. I think it would also help keep things from being way too overcomplicated with Omni movements. I know something like this is probably a big ask at this point because that is a pretty big layer to their gameplay. But I just couldn't help but think as I was playing through the beta here that tactical sprint just didn't seem worth it for the increased sprint out time, and it kind of felt like I was running in mud compared to something like Modern Warfare 3. Next up for the bad section, more so something to really keep an eye on here, spawns. Of course, when it comes to something like spawns, you really need a good amount of gameplay time to start to get a good feel for the spawn systems. Also, the general player behavior will change and evolve over time. People start settling in, so it is a little bit early to say for sure. But I will say already I have run into some very questionable spawn situations, both with myself spawning in a bad situation or practically watching enemy players spawn. And on top of that, the general flow with the spawns is very difficult for me to predict at the moment. Again, more playtime will probably fix some of that at least. But my initial thoughts, if you were to ask me about spawns right now, would be it probably needs a good amount of work at the moment. Next up, something I've noticed so far with my early playtime, keeping in mind I've been playing like since the moment the beta went live, this is the general connection quality and the consistency of ping from one game to the next. I seem to be bouncing from 30 ping to 50 ping to 110 ping, back to 50 ping, then up to 110 ping again. And I know, the beta just went live. I'm sure the servers are being completely overloaded at the moment. I know some people are having some problems just getting into the game as I'm recording this video. So perhaps that's some of it, but man, I hope we see a lot more consistency over time because the inconsistency right now is terrible. And on that note, something that happens literally every year with a beta, even when I do have a good ping, I have been noticing some discrepancy between like time to kill versus time to die. There will be situations where I just get insta-deleted by enemies, and yet even when I'm hitting every single bullet, it takes me noticeably longer to get a kill on them. This is just a desync sort of an issue, and again, we see this at the beginning of every single beta, or at least I have. So usually that stuff stabilizes over time, and I hope they can get on top of that sooner rather than later. After that, just a few miscellaneous things here that I'm not really liking what I'm seeing so far. The first thing here is the camera animation when you die can be very jarring. I have all of the motion settings turned to the lowest, and yet I still feel almost a level of motion sickness if I'm dying consistently and having to watch that animation. Just the way the camera moves and follows the player as they're dying, I'm really not a fan of how that's currently tuned, and I hope that's something they can adjust over time. Another thing that may be a bit of a controversial opinion, I don't like the human shield mechanic. I totally understand it's just a gimmick for fun. I honestly haven't even run into it yet in the beta, and it's probably not going to end up being a major issue or anything with the game. But just the fact that it exists in the state that it does exist, I'm not a big fan of it. And the biggest issue I have here is just the fact that if somebody were to use you as a human shield, there's nothing you can do for that period of time. You're just their hostage. And knowing Call of Duty players, I have a feeling this is just going to lead to more people rage quitting. The moment they get taken hostage, they're just going to leave the game. We already see people doing this with just simple executions, and this is sort of taking that to the next level, where instead of holding them hostage essentially for like 3 or 4 seconds for that animation to take place, now you can hold them for, I think it's like 15, 20 seconds or something like that, and then you can also perform the execution after that. And personally, while I get it, some people are going to have a lot of fun with it, and it's by no means a deal breaker for me, I would just rather not have that mechanic in the game. Now, another thing that I'm not loving so far is the current score streak costs. It takes a lot more than you would normally expect to earn even just a simple UAV. It's 675 score to earn one of those. which definitely feels a little bit strange, and perhaps what they're trying to do here is just avoid UAV spam and encourage people to more so use the Scout Pulse, which is the personal UAV. But it definitely feels strange having earned 675 score for a UAV. And then another thing is something like a Hellstorm missile, that's 1200 score to earn. And while I like this version of the Hellstorm, and I think it is reasonably strong, I don't think it's 1200 score strong. But there we go. This just leaves us with one last thing I wanted to mention here when it comes to my initial impressions on the bad side. And this is the usual modern COD complaints, matchmaking and disbanding lobbies. At the moment, in the beta, lobbies are disbanding, and that's one of the big reasons we're seeing such a swing with pings from one game to the next. If lobbies would stay together, that wouldn't be happening. And then, of course, the matchmaking is super sweaty, but also keep in mind, this is the closed portion of the beta. I was playing like the moment they turned the servers on, and obviously the people playing right now, on average, are going to be much better than the typical player you'd run into in Call of Duty. So I get that, but I also suspect we're going to be seeing the exact same matchmaking system we've been dealing with for years now. And there we go. That's going to wrap it up for my main initial impressions when it comes to the Black Ops 6 beta. I'm sure there were a bunch of little things that I missed here, and much of that will make it into the feedback videos that I'll be creating. Again, I'll probably make one at the end of week 1, and then after week 2, I'll do a final beta review / feedback video. But in general, I've been having a lot of fun with this so far. I'm really looking forward to hopping in and streaming it this afternoon on my Twitch channel, so if you guys haven't followed me there, make sure you do so, and come check out the stream if that interests you. And this is where I'm just curious to hear from you guys in those comments down below. Now that we've got the game in the hands of the community, how are you feeling about Black Ops 6 so far? What are some of your initial impressions? If you enjoyed the video, a like rating is always appreciated. And don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.